Okay, so yesterday we discussed the ability of the Evet to say Eini's, the ability of the master to say Eini Zancha, say me Eini Zancha. Work for me, but I'm not supporting you. The Gemara brought two contradicting proofs. One of them says one of the proofs were that a master could tell his slave, work for me and I'm not supporting you. And the other point was the master cannot tell the slave, work for me and I'm not supporting you. The final proof was from the fact that let's say the slave is injured. He's injured in a manner called chayvel. Chayvel, like we explained, chayvel is person to person impact, where one person injures another person. In general, there's a few different categories of mazik. One of them, for example, is called bur. Bur would be where you put a stumbling block in front of somebody else. You dig a pit and somebody falls in. You're chayav for damages. We'll learn about that more in Bava Kama. In other ways, where your animal hurts somebody, your dog bites somebody's foot. If your dog bites somebody's foot, that's considered nizkei mammon. What was owned by you, your dog, hurt somebody's foot. Chayvel is battery, person to person, where one person hits another person. And the penalty for chayvel is stricter than any other type of nezikin. All other damages pay less than chayvel. What does chayvel pay? Chayvel pays nezik, tsar, ripa, sheves, and baishas. 5 different payments. Nezik is the net depreciation. Nezik would only be paid when there's permanent damage, right? And that sort of encapsulates the total value of work that was lost. You have tsar, which is the pain that he suffers. We'll discuss these more. Ripoy is to heal him. Sheves is the fact that he's locked up in his room and can't work at all. So even if the guy is permanently disfigured, such that he can do only minimum, maybe he can watch a field of cucumbers for the rest of his life. But while he's in bed healing, he can't even watch the field of cucumbers. So therefore, you have to pay sheves. And then baishas is the embarrassment that he has to walk around and count, whatever that is. So when the slave is hurt, is assaulted, the payment of sheves goes to the master, and the master is entitled to tell the slave, go collect charity. And this clearly proves that the master is entitled to make the claim of asayimi v'eini zancha. Work for me and I'm not supporting you. Because over here, the guy can't work. And we still say that the work benefit payment goes to the master. Evidently, because the master is entitled to say, work for me and I'm not supporting you, and go collect charity. Okay, Amar Mar, nice and shiftoi for us the rabbi. The sheves and refuah is paid out to the master. So the Mar says shifta pshita. The fact that the payment for staying home, that makes sense. Refuah say it's shichalei. The Gemara says the chiddush here is, why are you paying the master to heal him? Refuah said the dehi, what's the payment of you're paying the guy for the cost of the medical bills? In other words, the cost of being healed. Who has to be healed? Not the master. He's fine. It's a slave that has to be healed. So why is he paying the master the money for being healed? So the Gemara says, "Lo tzricha." It's not the idea here is as follows: the amdu lechamish yom avdalei samach charifa v'itzu b'tilsi yom gemi. So I guess somebody, maybe Charles, will give us some modern day example of this. But apparently, there's 2 ways to heal the guy. You could either heal him in a way that will, the normal way is 5 days, or you can make a strong, potent medicine, and it'll heal the guy in 3 days. Okay, today I guess it's probably like surgeries, more sophisticated, less, does it leave a scar, right? It's always a big question. People will do 10 more surgeries that shouldn't have a scar. Okay, so therefore,
you hire a higher priced professional.
What was that?
You get a higher priced professional. You can have a general surgeon or you can have a plastic surgeon.
Okay, there we are. Very good. Okay, so you have so what do you have to do here? So when you pay him to be healed, you pay him the price of the plastic surgeon. And who do you pay it to? The master, who is entitled to say, go use the regular surgeon, go use the general surgeon.
HMO.
Okay. And the idea here is, I would think that the pain associated with the fact that he's getting a faster surgery, a more potent medicine, so that pain, in other words, because the slave suffered an injury, the slave should have a right to take the money being paid out by the assaulter and get a better treatment. No, it's up to the master, and the master is entitled to say, take a more potent, more difficult treatment so that you're able to work harder for an extra 2 days. Yeah, it gives you an appreciation of, what it's like today to live in a society that does not have slaves. It's incredible. Okay. Tanya, the Bryce says, Rabbi Lozer said as follows, Amarno the mayor. Okay, so now we get back to the original discussion. We recall there was a machlekes between Rav Meir and the Rabbanon. Rav Meir says that a slave does not want to be freed, and the Rabbanon say that a slave does want to be freed. And we pointed out so far 3 possibilities of why a slave would not want to be a free man, and they were: number 1. Number 1 is personal responsibility. He has to pay the bills now. Number 2 is that he cannot eat truma, and number 3 is that his sexual mores are required to go to the free man level, which is much more stringent than the slave. Now, let's address each one. The first one we've already addressed. The first one was personal responsibility. According to the final impact of the Gemara, what's the decision of personal responsibility? Actually, an Eved also may have to have personal responsibility. Why? Because the master could tell him, so it's not a net benefit. In other words, the slave does not have a benefit of actually being supported and having to pay the bills and having somebody else pay the bills. It's not true. The master could tell the slave, not paying the bills, go take care of yourself. Not only that, you know what? Give me all your income and then figure out how to pay the bills. That also is acceptable.
The kind of code of behavior is going to get fragged.
Yeah.
You know what that term means?
No, I'm not familiar.
Fragged. It means when you have a really awful superior officer on the battlefield, and he's so lousy that his own men assassinate him from behind.
Okay. Now, where were we? Okay. So that first option is eliminated. There's no benefit to being a slave with regard to having someone else pay the bills. So now we continue with the other part of the discussion, which was the end of the Mishnah. Tanya, we learned. Rabbi Lozer says, Amarno the mayor. We said to Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Lozer was a contemporary of Rabbi Meir. Remember, both of them, Rabbi Lozer and Rabbi Meir, were both students of Rabbi Kiva. So he didn't call him Rav Meir, he said Meir. Why would an Eved not want to leave? Amar Lanu, so Rabbi Meir said back to them, it's an obligation. Shem haya Eved kayan, because if he's a slave of a kayan. He can no longer eat truma. So he said to him, hold on a second. We said to him, what do you mean? You could eat truma, but the guy doesn't have to give him anything. The master doesn't have to give the slave anything. So what do you mean he gets truma? He doesn't get anything. The master could say, I'm not giving you a penny, and go work for me. Amrulonu, so Rameir responded, Uma ilu evet kayin shabarach, ve'eshes kayin shamar dal bailo. Hala echlan betruma. Rameir said the fact that the master is not giving him anything makes no difference. If he runs away and goes to a different side of the country, he can still collect truma because he's a slave of a kayin. Vizeh, but this person who somebody acquired him a shikhr on his behalf, and someone who became emancipated, any eichel, he cannot eat. 1 second. Okay, so the rabbis responded to him. He said that in other words, we agree with you with regard to Aval Isha. The rabbis are responding to Rameir. Aval Isha chayfula. We acknowledge that a woman is an obligation because she can posel min truma umafsida min hamizaynis, because she loses truma and she loses mizaynis, she loses support. Okay, so Gemara says, "Maika amrulei, Maika mahadrulei." What exactly is the question and answer here? This is the response. Hashiftuni al hamizaynis. Mata tishivuni al hatruma. In other words, Rameir says to Rabbi Lazar, okay, so you have a response with regard to mizaynis. In other words, that the master is not obligated to support a slave. So the fact the slave has somebody else paying the bills is not a benefit of being a slave, because the master could take that away at any given time. But what about the fact that he could still eat truma? If you'll say that he could throw him an emancipation and invalidate him from eating truma. He's able to run away for Ozal Almo, and then he won't be able to throw a divorce to him. In other words, you'll tell me that the master could force his slave to be emancipated. He can forcefully emancipate a slave. He can't really, because if the slave gets wind of the plan and the slave wants to continue to eat truma, he'll run away, and now you have to find him in order to forcibly emancipate him. It's a good response. In other words, it's not so easy to forcefully divorce somebody. Obviously, we said today you can't divorce somebody by force, but you can't. But even if you could, it's not so easy to forcefully divorce someone or forcefully emancipate somebody. So Rava says. So in other words, what's the rabbi's response to that? The reason why this is not a response is because ultimately the slave is owned by who? The master. And all he needs to do is sell him to Yisrael, and then he can no longer eat truma. So the fact that he's able to eat truma isn't something the master can't get rid of. All he needs to do is sell him to Yisrael, and then he can no longer eat truma anymore. I don't know. All he needs to do is he doesn't even have to sell him completely. He just take a partnership. If there's a Jew who's a partner in the slave, then he can no longer eat truma. Wherever he is, he's selling him half the slave, he can no longer eat truma. Okay, now here's the obvious question here. So again, there's 3 advantages of being a slave. One advantage you said is not really an advantage. The slave does not really have somebody else paying the bills. Only if the guy wants to, he doesn't have to. The second advantage of truma, the obvious question here is that only pertains to an eved who's a slave of a kohen. If you're not owned by a kohen, what advantage is there to be a slave? Well, Meir Tainich eved kohen, eved Yisrael ma'ik l'meimer. What about if you're an eved Yisrael? You're taking away his ability to marry any maidservant, period. It doesn't even have to be owned by the same master. So the Gemara says, you're permitting him to marry a regular kosher woman. So the Gemara says a slave would rather marry a maidservant. Why? He'd rather that hefkeros, the freedom to choose multiple partners. Why? Because zilolei, he's willing to degrade her more in his sexual desires. Shkichalei, she's more, they're much easier to find because there are many of them. And pritzalei, he's willing to deal with her in a much more promiscuous fashion. He's willing to. It's another form of degrading her, and therefore he'd rather have multiple shvachais to deal with, and the associated degradation, than have to marry a regular woman and have to treat her with respect and dignity. Says the Mishnah. So So this was the third thing which was common between Shtar Shichur and between this is a variation of the last Mishnah. The previous Mishnah says if a guy says give an emancipation to my slave or a divorce to my wife, the rabbis say the emancipation is acquired immediately. However, the divorce is not effectuated until the woman gets the divorce. Here we have a slight variation here, where the guy says, I don't want the slave to be freed until the document gets to his hands. The halacha is if he dies, so you do not give it to him after he dies. However, if he says tnu mana leishplani, go give $100 to somebody else, umeis, and then he dies, the gift is valid even after he dies. And of course, the question the Gemara is going to ask here is why, in this scenario, the guy clearly indicates he wants he doesn't want the slave to be freed until the document has reached the slave. So why by money is it any different? What's the difference by money? We have two opinions. First opinion, Amar Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta Mishmei de Rav. Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel, the son of Marta, says in the name of Rav, Hushat Tzivur Umunachem Bekeren Zavis. We're talking about where the money is put in a corner. In other words, we're talking about not that he said give $100. He said go to the corner. There's a pile of cash in the corner. Give that cash to the guy. So it's very specific. It's not like he's giving value of $100, but he's giving specific $100 bills. So the Gemara says, "B'mayaskin, what are we talking about? Are we talking about a healthy person? What's the difference? In other words, the guy was healthy. He was a normal, healthy person. And then he died in a helicopter crash 5 minutes later. If that's the case, 1 second. The halacha is that in order for somebody else to acquire the money, they need to do mashicha. They need to physically move the money. And in this scenario, nobody moved the money yet. So it should not be acquired. Ve'ela must be b'shchifira. We're talking about somebody who's deathly ill. So the Gemara says, if somebody's deathly ill, my area tzvurin ki ein tzvurinami. Even if the money isn't in a pile, the Hakaimalam we learned the divrei shchif mirak eksuvim uchim masurim dami. The rabbis basically decreed that if there's somebody who's on his deathbed, anything that he says is considered to be done. Typically, you might need an act of kinyan, you might need somebody to write a document, but shchif mirak, if somebody's on his deathbed, there's no time. And we don't want the guy to be concerned while he's dying about what's going to happen to his estate. So therefore, anything that he says is effectuated immediately if he dies.
What's the difference between a shchivmara and a glosses?
The Gemara says, what is it? It's Roiv Geisim, I think, on Lamisa. Shchimira, many of them end up living. But it's effectively, in our context, it's effectively the same thing. It's another word for it, also called a mesukan. We'll use that word in a moment. All those words are the same thing. Effectively, if somebody's about to die, then anything he says in terms of monetary transactions, it's as if it's done. But if he ends up living, he can change. He can change his mind in all of them. Okay. So in other words, if the guy's deathly ill, why does it have to be in a corner? Wherever the money is, the law is the words of the shchif mirah, the words of the deathly ill, are as if they're written and handed over. You don't need a kinyan. So Amar Zvid said, "Lo'olam bebari." Amarav. We're talking about somebody. Okay. Where are we? Amarav, like the opinion of Rav Huna Amarav, who said as follows: if a guy says, I have 100 coins, Jules, you have 100 of my dollars. I want that money to be given over to Eric.
Yeah.
And it was said b'maimet shloshtan. We'll soon learn more about maimet shloshtan. Comes up again in this Masechta and other in Kedushin as well. Whatever maimet shloshtan is, kana, that's a valid acquisition. What is maimet shloshtan? Maimet shloshtan is you say it in front of three people. You have three people present. You say this money belongs now to the other person. The halacha is it belongs now to the other person. Now, there's a fundamental question: does that work? And anytime we talk about money, we talk about two things. We talk about value, and we talk about an item, which happens to be something that's easily transactable that we call currency, right? So, what's the difference? In other words, so here's a very major question which the Gemara will address by maimet shloshtan. In other words, you have three people present. Can you transact value, or can you transact a possession which happens to be money? In other words, do you have to have? Does Jules have to be holding a bag of money for me to give it to you? And then what did you get? You got that bag of money. You got that bag specifically, and all the specific dollar bills that are inside of it. Or do we say that no? We say that
Can be any bills from anywhere that add up to the same value bills. Or does that, or is it, it has to be that particular bag and those particular bills?
what was that?
Never mind.
Okay. The other option is that maimet shloshtan works for value. So something like Jules owes me money. That money should go to Eric. There's no specific bag of money there. There's no specific dollar bills. It's value that's owed, not a bag of possessions which happen to be money.
Mhm.
So this is a fundamental question with regard to maimet shloshtan.
You have to know the value of the money though.
Well, you're transacting value, so it doesn't have to be the entire thing. If you owe me $10,000, I could say $5 of it should go to Jules, or I could say $2 should go to Jules, to Tarek. I mean, however, if it's a bag of money, no, I don't need to have any perception of value. I'm not giving you value. I'm giving you a bag. Whatever's in the bag is yours. So there's a question here whether maimet shloshtan work requires tzvurin or not. Maimet shloshtan again is three people present. Tzvurin means it's in a bag. It's specified dollar bills. I'm not giving you value. I'm giving you possessions. Some of those possessions happen to be currency. So according to this first opinion, maimet shloshtan only works on dollar bill on possessions. So you have a bag of money, and that money is transacted through maimet shloshtan. So basically, the idea of the mission is as follows: if the guy wanted the document to be, the guy was healthy, he wanted the document to be written. Therefore, he can change his mind. If he ends up dying, we don't give the document. However, if he gave money and there were three people present and the money was in a bag, then the money is transacted through a kinyan called maimet shloshtan. Because three people were present and he said this money should go over to Eric, therefore the money goes over to Eric. Get together? Okay, Rav Papa says, we're talking about a scenario where the guy is deathly ill. Ukeidach the Rav, like the other statement of Rav, the Amar Rav said, if a shchivnira, someone who's deathly ill, he says, give money, he says, take some of my money and give it to somebody else. So if he says, take this bag of money, we give it to him. We give the money over. If he says, take money, then we presume chashin and shem mana cover. We presume that the guy is actually alluding to the fact that previously there was a secret arrangement between the two people, between the dead man and his friend, and the money is buried somewhere, and he's not actually referencing that the people around him should transact his own money, but he means that wherever that hidden buried money is, the other guy should be able to keep it. Okay, and of course the Gemara points out the halacha is l'kfura loy chayshinan. We are not, if somebody's deathly ill and he says give $1,000 to somebody else, we have no suspicion that there is a secret $1,000 somewhere buried somewhere, and that's the money the guy's talking about. What we do is we take $1,000 out of his estate and we give it over to his friend. We are not concerned with kfura, but that's the first opinion. Okay. So according to the first opinion, we So let's review here. We have two understandings about why the money goes to his friend. The first understanding is we're talking about a healthy person, and we're talking about kinyan ma'am shloshtam, the kinyan that works through three people present. And according to this opinion, ma'am shloshtam requires tzvurin. Ma'am shloshtam works specifically on possessions. It does not work on value. The second opinion is we're talking about somebody who's deathly ill. And why do we require tzvurin? Why do we require a specific bag of money? Because this opinion is chashin on l'kfura. If you don't mention a specific bag of money, we're concerned that maybe they're talking about a secret pile of money, secret stash that somewhere these two people hid. And he's saying that you can keep it now. Okay. Those are the two opinions. So of course the Gemara is going to ask, Papa, my time, Aliyama curves vids. But Papa that says that we're talking about a shchiv meirah, somebody who's deathly ill, and he points to a pile of money and he says, give it to my friend, we give it to him. Why doesn't he say like Rav Zvid that says we're talking about a healthy person and we're talking about Ma'am Shloshtan? So Gemara says, Kasav Rav Papa says, Kiyama Rav Loishna b'milva v'loishna b'pikodan. Rav Papa holds that Ma'am Shloshtan works both on value and on possessions. If our mission is talking specifically about tzvurin, meaning possessions, it's a possession of money as opposed to the value of the money, then Rav Papa doesn't want to say it's talking about Ma'am Shloshtan because Ma'am Shloshtan wouldn't require possessions. It works even on value. So therefore, Rav Papa preferred to speak about the gift of a shchiv meirah, of a deathly ill person. And according to Rav Papa, the gift of a shchiv meirah also has to be tzvurin. It has to be a specific pile of money because otherwise we're concerned about the secret stash. Okay. Rav Zvid, my time, Papa. So why does Rav Zvid not go with Rav Papa? So the Gemara says, Rav Zvid said that it is not reasonable to presume that our Mishnah is talking about someone who's deathly ill. Why not? Mimai. How do we know this? The guy says, give this divorce to my wife. You don't give the divorce after he dies. Time of demes, specifically because he died. That's why you don't give the divorce to his wife. But if he was still alive, nice, and you would give the divorce. Time of Amar Tnu. The Mishnah requires the deathly ill fellow to say, give the divorce to my wife. But if he didn't say give it, then a nice. We would not give it. We would not give the divorce. But we actually learned that a shchiv meirah, someone who's deathly ill, even if he doesn't say tnu, he doesn't say give the divorce, we would give it anyway. So let's explain here. Now, let's say we see a guy who's clearly in a very confused state of mind. For example, he's on death row, right? He's going to be burnt in an auto da fe, or he's going to be, he's deathly ill. He's going on a long, perilous journey, one that not everybody comes back from. And he says, he's on the way, he's on the journey, he's walking down to to get burnt or whatever, some death row event. And he tells his wife, he tells the messenger, he says, go divorce my wife, or go write a divorce. He doesn't mean write it. He means write it and give it. It's just that he's so torn, eating his last supper, that he doesn't have enough time to think, and tell the guy, write it and give it. And therefore, when somebody is in such a situation, the rabbi said, writing a divorce means write it and give it. Why would he want a divorce? Why would he want a divorce if he's dying anyway? The answer is his wife is not eligible for yibum. That's the idea. If he divorces his wife, she's not eligible for yibum. Okay, 1 second. Okay, now the question is as follows. Our Mishnah requires the statement of tnu, of give the divorce, which clearly indicates our Mishnah is not talking about a shchiv meirah, because a shchiv meirah would not be required to say the word tnu. All he needs to do is say, kisvu, write a divorce for my wife, and we presume that means kisvu, write it, and also tnu, give it. A regular person needs to say kisvu and tnu. He needs to give authority to write the document and authority to give the document. The Tanan we learned about 8 lines down. Barishayna, first one line, Hayu Oimrim. Hayotzi, they would say, Hayotzi b'koller, someone who's going out in chains. But Amran, he says, Kisvu getlish, they write a divorce for my wife. Haray elu yichtavu v'yitnu. They should write it and give it, hopefully before he dies, because once he dies, it's too late. Chazru Leimer, eventually they also included Afa Mefarish, V'hayotzi b'shayra, somebody who's going out on a long, perilous journey. Reb Shimon Shazuri, I remember Reb Shimon Shazuri said, Afa Mesukin. Even someone who's a Mesukin. What is a Mesukin? Someone who's deathly ill. So someone who's deathly ill does not need to say tnu. The fact that our Mishnah requires the word tnu is evidence that our Mishnah is not discussing a shchiv meirah. We're talking about a healthy person. So why is a healthy person's gift of money valid immediately? The answer is ma'amad shloshna. This transaction that happens in front of 3 people. Okay, so that's why Rabbi Zvid does not like the opinion of Rav Papa that turns our Mishnah into a discussion of a deathly ill person. The Gemara has a simple question, obviously, to conclude. Maskat for Rav Ashi, Uman name alone the Masisim of Shimon Shazuri, Dilmar Abonani. In other words, Rav Zvid is making a presumption here, saying that a shchiv meirah has to say kisvu and just has to say kisvu and not tnu, and that presumption comes from the opinion of Rav Shimon Shazuri. According to the other opinions, a shchiv meirah also has to say kisvu and tnu, write it and send it and give it. So what's the presumption that our Mishnah is of Shimon Shazuri? Maybe it's like the other opinions, and therefore you have no proof that our Mishnah cannot be discussing a shchiv meirah. It could very well be discussing a shchiv meirah. Together? Okay, next Gemara. Go back to the beginning of this statement. Gufa. We learned Amar Fun Amar Rav, Manali Biyotcha. I have $100 by Jules. Give it to Eric in front of 3 people. Kana. It's a valid form of acquisition. Nothing further is necessary. Amar Rava, so Rava says, Mistavra Milsa de Rav Bipikoden. This makes a lot of sense, Bipikoden, meaning with a possession, a specified item. Avo b'milva, but when handing over value, loy, it doesn't work. V'ha'alikim, but by God's name, I swear, Amar Rav said, afilu b'milva, even with regard to milva. Even with regard to value can be transacted through ma'amad shloshtan. Itmar nami, we learned as well. Amar Shmuel mishmei de Levi. Shmuel said in the name of Levi, Malva li biyadecha. Jules owes me money, and instead of paying me, pay Eric. Taneo the plenty. Go give it to Eric. B'ma'amad shloshtan in front of 3 people. Kana, that's a valid acquisition. The time am I? What's the reason? Amar says, okay, 1 second. Okay. In other words, how exactly can I transact the money that's in your possession to Eric? Okay, so the Gemara's first proposal is when I loan Jules the money, Jules agrees to pay back myself or anyone who comes with my power of attorney. And therefore, if I say the power of attorney should be handed over to Eric, so that works. Okay, hold on. So if that's the idea is that at the time of the loan, I'm saying that anybody who I hand it over to is also my representative. It would have to be that representative was alive at the time of the loan. If that's the case, let's say as a ma'amad shloshtan, I gave it as a gift to an infant. They were not alive when the loan was initiated. According to this line of reasoning, that transaction should not work. Why? Because when I loaned you the money, it was as if I said, anyone who comes with my power of attorney. Who's the anyone? Anyone who's alive. Why is this? We'll see. Because it's the concept of a dover shaloi b'laylam. I can only make a power of attorney at the time of the loan to people that I can give it today. If I can't give it today to them, then I can't make them into a power of attorney. And therefore, I can't today say that you owe somebody who will be born in the future because that person is not here now. Elami, Dafilu or Mayor Amr Makna Dover Shalabal Olam. Even we'll first explain the question, we'll go back to what a Dover Shalabal Olam is. Even according to a mayor that says that you can acquire something that doesn't exist yet. In other words, you can acquire the fruit of the tree, which by the way, incidentally, is a completely separate transaction than acquiring the tree for its fruit. Because the tree for its fruit is a valid transaction because the tree exists today. But acquiring the fruit of the tree is a non-existent proposition because there are no fruit of the tree, and that's not a legitimate sale. They didn't
have futures yet.
Yeah, exactly. They had futures, but the futures worked a little differently. The futures weren't, I would say it's structured more as an option than a future. Anyway, in other words, even if Ramirez says that I can buy the fruit of the tree, I as a person alive today can buy the fruit of the tree, but I can't sell the fruit of the tree to somebody who isn't born yet. And therefore, similarly, I can't, at the time of the transaction, the justification for how the methodology for how I'm able to transfer the loan from myself to Eric is because at the time of the transaction, we effectively agree that anybody who comes in my name you're agreeing to give them the money. But that means that requires that they be theoretically available today to get the money, and not at some later point in which they didn't exist at the time of the loan. Rashi explains the different methodology. Stop here. We'll see the next response tomorrow.